Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but can we keep the part where I yell, more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got, like, what, 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to start with that?
Here we go, exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing the exact same way? Let's start with the Smoky Bar.
No, it's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch, and it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
All right, we should be on.
All right, welcome everybody to the Wisdom Check. As usual, I am Dustin, positioned over here on my side of the screen with fancy green screen technology now. Ooh, I'm advanced. I'm in like the 20th century now. And over there, position where you usually find him also is Jeff. Jeff, welcome back to the show this week.
Hello. Thank you, Dustin.
And joining us, if you've been around here recently, is almost a familiar face. It's Travis Legge from Onyx Pass Publishing here to talk a little Scarlands with us. He just ran a one-shot a couple of weeks ago. If you tuned into that, you might recognize him from the one-shot he ran. So welcome back to the show, Travis.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be back. And that was a blast of a one-shot. We have to do more of that soon.
Absolutely. We had a great time with that. It was, shall we say, a cool experience?
It was cool, I would say, yes.
Terrible puns. Get ready
It was
for
frosty. Yeah.
My phone will not shut up today.
Yeah, of course. Dustin is an eligible bachelor these days, so he's getting blown up with friend requests and all kinds of stuff. So
that's how it works. Sorry about my social life.
But yeah, we had a really cool opportunity to try out the new Frostlands of Friend Relic and see some of the new stuff that you've been working on there. And so we thought we'd have you back on and have a little chit-chat about that some more, get a little bit more in-depth information, and see if we can entice a few more people to be interested in that in particular.
Now, I made some spot notes from last week, because Travis showed up while me and you were having a fantastic talk about how to make 5e deadlier.
Yep.
And there was something I took careful notes on that I wanted to start off before we get into the meat of the Frostlands of Fenrilic. Travis, you seem like the kind of DM who would take some extra actions to hit a player while they're down, right? If that PC is down, right, you're taking those swings to push those death saves towards the end, right?
I mean, it depends on the situation, right? It depends. This is going to sound like a totally weird answer, but it's true. It depends on what am I trying to get out of that scene and what am I trying to establish with the people that they are fighting, right? If they're fighting somebody who, you know, if I want to make a villain, if I want to make somebody, make them loathe someone, then absolutely, yeah, they're going to be kicking people while they're down and all that sort of jazz. Another thing I'm a fan of is environmental conditions while someone is down.
Yeah,
that's always fun.
Yeah,
like your buddy's knocked out across the room, and the room's so. You know,
right.
Better get over there and give them a hand. But you know, there are certain enemies that maybe just don't, you know, they aren't quite so aggressive that don't want to kill them while they're down. So
I just brought it back up because you did hop in last week near the end. We were talking about how sometimes 5e doesn't feel very threatening.
Right.
And you had made a few comments in the chat about, well, wait till you see what we're doing with Scarred Lands. And I was like, good. I can't wait to have you on next week so we can talk about how to make 5e a little more dangerous. So, you know, I wanted to lead off with the starting thing of, you know, do you just go ahead and hit them while they're down? Because that was a fair amount of debate last week. I'm a firm believer the answer is yes. You twist that sword once. Not all 3 times, just once. just to make it seem, a little more dangerous. Then you move on, right? But I was just we had to have you weigh in on that before we start talking about how to make 5e in particular, maybe even stuff you're doing with Scarred Lands that'll help maybe give a little of that edge back to a game that sometimes it's fun, it's heroic, but comes off maybe a little soft sometimes for me.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And this is something that we've been working on in two different respects with Scarred Lands. So with Frostlands of Fenrilik, a lot of the focus was on creating an environment of danger and scarcity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Setting it up to where, this is a frozen wasteland. So if you're going to try to cross this frozen wasteland, it's going to be dangerous. It's going to tax your resources. You're going to need to do X, Y, or Z, or you're going to die. Right. So setting that up in terms of the way you're applying things, the systems that are already in place in 5e that you can lean on.
Mm-hmm.
Like Fenrilik specifically leans on the exhaustion mechanic.
Yeah.
If you're out in the cold too long.
Now, I would be willing to bet most people don't use the exhaustion mechanics. Why don't you just tell us what that exhaustion mechanic looks like a little bit?
So you basically have 5 levels, and your first level of exhaustion is not too bad. It's just like disadvantage on ability checks.
Mm-hmm.
But as these progress, they get just debilitating, and they get there pretty quickly. You only have 5 levels of them, and when you run out of exhaustion, you just die. There's not, you don't pass go, you don't collect $200, you don't sit and make some death saves, you just fall over dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think by applying that mechanic, you can really introduce situations that do make the players think twice and do bring that level of threat back into D&D without having to bolt on a whole ton of other systems to get there, which is nice. And the other thing that's handy about exhaustion, my players complain is a strong word, but they take note of the fact that I tend to lean into very flowery descriptions of what happens during combat, and they're often pretty gory.
Mm-hmm.
To my mind, if you're swinging around blades at people, and you've got this beast with 9 arms and 20 claws coming at you, pieces of flesh are going to be ripped off.
Mm-hmm.
Internal organs are going to wind up becoming temporarily external. You're going to have problems, and they're not going to be fun. Bones break, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of right, but then you go to sleep and you take your long rest, and then you get up and you're fine. And so I tackle that in 2 ways. One is by leveraging the exhaustion mechanic when I feel it's necessary. Say okay, yeah, you heal from that fight, but you're going to be walking around with a level of exhaustion until you complete 4 long rests because you have a broken rib, so it's unpleasant for you.
You're applying it in a way that maybe people don't think about.
Right. And then the other is, the whole, they used to talk early on in Supernatural, Jensen and Jared talked about how they had WB ointment, because they get into fights on the show and get all bloody and messed up. And then the next shot, they're fine. So there's a little bit of that
hero sort of stuff.
Right. I mean, you are these supernatural heroes that are running around in a fantastical land. So, I'm okay narratively with a little bit of, you just get better quickly. But I think if you want to really lean into a lasting effect for injury, exhaustion mechanic, and then tweaking how that works is a good way to take that. And then with Dead Man's Rust, which is the adventure that we have up on Kickstarter right now, we were faced with a very different problem. I wanted to do something, and it's funny, we started working on this book 16 months ago, something like that. So this was before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do something I think I mentioned before in conversation how much I love the Hollow Legionnaires, which is a specific race in Scarlands, which are these souls that are like bound to armor. And I thought, and that gives them certain advantages. They're not quite alive, but they're not undead or constructs quite either. And I love them so much and think they're just such great characters. So I wanted to do something that focused on putting them directly in harm's way, because I think the best stories are when you put your favorites in front of the shotgun. So we started working on the idea for Dead Man's Rust. The name of the adventure is based on Legionnaire's Rust, is this disease that shows up throughout the course of the adventure. And it's a mystical infection. It was created through the use of a true ritual, which is a magic mechanic that we add into Scarred Lands. I think there was something similar in 3rd edition. I know Scarred Lands had them in 3rd edition, but I think General D&D maybe had them in 3rd. And I think it might be similar to Pathfinder has like the occult ritual type thing.
I think that's
Pathfinder 2nd edition added something along those lines.
Yeah, so the idea being that it's like you're spending a spell slot still, and you're still leaning on your spellcasting ability, but it's a much more involved process that you can easily fail at, and failure comes with a huge cost. It can be deadly. It can make you wish you were dead, things like that. So the idea being then, okay, well, let's lean on that to create these diseases. And as I was looking at it, I'm like, okay, well, normally Hollow Legionnaires are resistant to disease anyway. Plus, you have in 5th edition, I think basically once you hit 3rd level for your PCs, disease is just off the table. It's
essentially
no longer a problem.
That was going to be my next question. That was going to be my next question: is how do you handle that when, like, a druid at that point can basically wave his hand and it's all over?
Right. So, taking all of these elements that we already have in play, I created a thing that we refer to as malignant maladies. They are diseases or curses that are created through the use of a true ritual. And because of the level of magic that's involved in their creation, the only way to treat them is through a true ritual, which often requires kind of like the Hollywood trope of like, if we get patient 0, we can fix this. The idea that you have to know what went into the ritual that made this thing to be able to defeat it. Otherwise, you get into a situation like with Legionnaire's Rust, they can use Remove Curse doesn't touch it. Lesser Restoration doesn't touch it. If you cast Heal, I think, on the person, you can reduce the exhaustion that they're currently suffering from it, but you don't. They just go back to 0 and start the clock ticking again.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That's a high level.
That's how you get around it.
I mean, you're talking that's 6th level, I think. So
right. So you can. I wanted to make it set up so that it's extremely threatening to the Hollow Legionnaires. I wanted to make it so that if you're playing Hollow Legionnaires in the campaign, which I encourage people to do if they pick it up, that's kind of D&D on hard mode, because you can get this disease all over the place. And then from a narrative perspective, the disease only affects Hollow Legionnaires and constructs, but anyone can contract it. And this was another thing that, like, pre-COVID, we had no idea what we were, this was not like a statement we were trying to make. But you can go into this game playing a party of, non-Hollow Legionnaire adventurers. All of you contract this thing. You get 0 negative effects from it. But Hollow Legionnaires are suddenly dropping dead around you, and you don't know why. So that level of of coping with the realization that, oh crap, I'm a plague bearer, and how does that affect your actions, especially because you're trying to help these people that are sort of imperiled. To me, that's a cool space to play with, and it creates. I think not only does it make it a more dangerous environment than 5e maybe sometimes normally is, but it also creates some of those moral dilemmas and opportunities for sacrifice. It's very easy in a standard 5e adventure to be the guy who's going to run into the room full of enemies, and I'll hold them off while the rest of you go, because chances are pretty good I'm going to walk away from this. It makes those calculations mean more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're like, okay, you know, you're playing a Hollow Legionnaire, and you're like, if I go into that area, I can see everything in there is covered with this rust stuff, because as the disease progresses, they literally get covered with rust. I can see that everything's covered with this rust. So am I going to be enough of a hero to run in that door and face down certain death? You know, this isn't, I run in there and hope the druid gets to me in time. This is, I'm going to have a problem for the next several levels of this campaign.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's like that scene from the Chernobyl series, you know, where all the guys are trying to go up on the roof and get the radioactive sludge off the roof. So yeah, they had like, you know, 10 seconds at a time. Yeah, it's a good scene.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you have, so by turning those knobs, most of them are already there. And the idea, if you're going to add a mechanic, like the way that we did with the malignant maladies, is try to make that mechanic as unobtrusive as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Because 5e is a pretty robust system and it covers a lot. And so if you're going to bolt stuff onto it, I think making that as elegant and as unobtrusive as you can while still achieving your goal, I think is the way to go with it. And I think that those are the kind of tweaks that a DM can also make at the table relatively easily if they stop and look at how some of these conditions apply, and ways to maybe tweak the recovery from those conditions. You know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you think people just get too lost in the hit point bank?
Oh,
they lean too heavily on that.
Yeah, but I mean, by people, I don't think that just means DMs and players either. I think that means people that are sitting at Wizards and everywhere else that's doing 5e material. Mm-hmm. I think it's, from a design perspective, I think people get a little too lost in that.
Yeah, I think if you give somebody a certain number of dials to turn, those are the dials that are going to turn. You know, and so, you know, if you got saving throws and if you got hit points, that's basically the only things you can really lean on, unless you, like you said there, use the exhaustion system. Like, you know, we've thought about it quite a bit. You know, like in the Frostland situation, obviously survival is a big aspect of it, and that's kind of a hard one to kind of impress on people in a D&D world. With, again, we can create food and water, we can you know, make fire from you know a cantrip.
Can make fire.
You know, you got like invulnerable domes that you can comfortably sleep in with, you know, temperature controlled and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it really is a system. Like I said last week, like it almost just impresses upon you to want to hand wave a lot of that stuff. You know, just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's all good. Get on to this part of it. You know, like, so it's interesting. Like I said, when you try to take it and try to inject those things back in, like I'm curious what level of like playtesting it took to figure out something that would work.
I mean, I think a lot of it was with Fenric specifically. I think a lot of it was just having a group that had amazing system literacy. So like we all kind of knew, like, okay, this is going to do X, Y, and Z at the table. And yeah, you know, we ran some playtests and things along those lines, or just ran like some mock travel even. But the other component beyond that, because you can sort of stack the deck a little bit. And there are some other levers that we twist a little bit in Fenric. Clerics are exceedingly rare there, which is not to say you can't play one, but they're very rare. Most of the characters there are druids. Because Scarred Lands has a very strict, if you revere the Titans, you're a druid. If you worship the gods, you're a cleric. Never the twain shall meet. That's just how your power works. And the gods are almost, you know, worship of the gods is almost non-existent on Fenric. So that does cut out a little bit. Now, druids are obviously really handy at survival stuff. But not quite as adept at the I'm going to wave away every illness that comes along as, say, a cleric might be. The other aspect of that, the other knob I think you have to turn, is making sure that anytime the characters decide we're going to hunker down and throw up our tiny huts and use a bunch of magic to make fire and use a bunch of magic to make a nice, safe environment for us to live in, you better be damn sure you're not doing that somewhere where that's going to call the attention of the local wildlife.
Okay. Yeah.
And to balance that out, creating local wildlife that not only survives but thrives in this environment that is in and of itself caustic and deadly to the PCs. So if the environment's so bad and these creatures are doing just fine in it, how bad are they going to be in terms of their how dangerous are they going to be for the PCs?
So it feels like what you end up with when you're playing is a very simulationist style of game, maybe more so than what you see with a lot of other settings. Would you say that maybe is more your style of what you're shooting for with Scarred Lands?
I mean, I would say fantasy simulationist. It gets all of the joy rapidly leaves the room when I start thinking about like how Frostbite actually works. You know what I mean? Like, if I have to start really like, start
with toes,
right? Right. So I want it to rhyme with reality. I don't want it to simulate reality.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
That is a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, I think, and I think that there's not any real like secret sauce here besides, at the world building stage, looking at where these components do come together. I think that's, and I'm a big fan of Dark Sun.
Oh yeah,
it's good stuff.
So looking at the way that Dark Sun built a world that was antagonistic to the players in and of itself. It's part of what drew me to Scarred Lands in the first place, is it is a world that the land is antagonistic to you. And it's not out of malice, it's just because it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in football, and they refer to the 13th man, that extra defender.
Yeah.
Extra defender is the crowd in the dome, right? Like you got to play in that environment. Like that's what you want to make 5e feel like you went from being the home team to the away team, is kind of what you're pushing for with this. And that's something that I have a problem with 5e. I can never seem to get over that hump. Like, and I feel like to get over that hump, I have to push to a point where I feel like I'm not being fair. so that's why it's quite interesting. Like, that's why I gravitate towards a lot of times other systems completely, where I feel like I don't have to try so hard to get that level of danger in there. So that's why I was like all excited to hear about how these play out.
Well, and one of the things that's interesting, particularly when you're looking at like environmental hazards and how applying a condition across the battlefield changes 5e, you can do something pretty minimal and create all kinds of havoc, because now all of this bounded accuracy that they spent 5 years playtesting and is runs like a well-oiled machine and all that jazz between the creatures and the player characters, now you've thrown a wrench in that works. And so it starts not only to just mechanically do interesting things. You take, for example, there's an area in Scarred Lands on Gelspad called the Festering Fields. It's a place that's cursed with like necromantic energy from just a side effect of the Divine War. And every once in a while, there'll be a storm will come through that it's basically this caustic rain that deals like 1d4 acid damage, I think, per turn in it. And the undead absolutely hate it. They run away when it comes.
Interesting.
But you stick the players in like a blind, like a crack in the wall, right? Like they've gone into this crevice to seek some shelter because there's, they see a creature they're afraid of or something like that. As they get down in there, there's a horde of undead that are in that crevice. the sky's still open, then you start dropping that rain on them. Now it's like you are standing between these things and their escape from this environmental thing that's creating a problem. And you're taking just enough damage every turn that all the players start panicking because they're like, oh crap, I have to heal this, you know.
Yeah.
Or they go the other route and they ignore it for too long, you know.
Oh man, that's insidious. I love that. Yeah, I mean, because it is something that it crosses your mind really rapidly as a player. You know, you start seeing a D4, you think, it's not that big of a deal. You do that couple rounds in a row and it's not easing up, you're not finding a way to get out of it. Yeah, daylight starts to go out a little bit. And
especially if there's still other chunks of damage coming in.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're fighting undead in it. Now you're not only dealing with, you know, undead attacks and some damage here and there. Like you got that constant damage on top of it. It stacks up pretty quick.
Yeah, it puts a timer on things. It says find a solution quickly.
and you want to get that pulse pounding a little bit, because I think if you can create that sensation, you don't really have to get particularly like brutal with the players to get them off their balance, right? And you're always going to find, you're going to find at a lot of tables, you'll find people that are very tactically minded, and they shine in those environments. And my advice as a GM is to encourage that as much as possible. Like when, when one person starts coming up with like the really good idea, and they find some clever way to survive that environment, awesome, good for them. Give them a cookie and some inspiration. Because to my mind, that's the trial that kind of a situation is creating. And if they have come up with a cool way around it, good on them,
Absolutely.
So, I mean, but I really do think that can be achieved. A lot of that can be achieved just by looking at what is there in the engine and saying, okay, well, what can I create that's going to generate X, Y, or Z effect? And how does that play at the battlefield? And what conditions are we not seeing in the game, right?
Right. Yeah.
You look at what you're fighting. Let's say you're walking your party through, just to pull a campaign out of my tailpipe. Let's say you're taking your party through, Rise of Tiamat, right? Like you can look at the enemies in that and see, okay, they're doing X types of damage. When my players fail saving throws, they're going to experience X, Y, and Z conditions. By the time they get into the 5th or 6th adventure here, they're going to be built to cope with those things. They're going to have gone and gotten armor that will deal with that. They're going to have learned spells to overcome that. They're going to be leaning on certain saving throws. They're going to be doing everything they can to mitigate that because, well, we're fighting Cult of the Dragon people, and Cult of the Dragon people are going to do X, Y, and Z to us. That's when you start throwing in like the wrenches in the works, right? So they haven't been petrifying you. Let's see how you deal with petrification, things along those lines. Let's see how you deal with a situation where, maybe perhaps one of them has a weapon that just deafens everyone in the area.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, like we tend not to see a lot of diseases or poisons in our games. And I don't know if that's just because the systems are a little wacky, or by the time that they become available, they're just no longer viable as a threat, or what.
I think it's the extra tracking. I think that, like, when you think of something like, I know in Pathfinder First Edition, like the way bleeds ran, where it was like every round take off 5 extra damage, like not like a D5 or anything. It was just tick off 5 more. Like it's one more thing that the player or DM has to remember, like every turn to like remember to subtract. So like you'll do it for the first round or two, then they forget. So I think like sometimes it's the extra tracking of the mechanics that I think sometimes will cause DMs to stay away from some of those extra systems now and then, because it's one more thing they got to try to track.
Well, and I think that, DMs, obviously, they're going to run to their taste. Right. But I know what's helped me with that particular problem, because I hate paperwork and I hate math. The two things that have been a huge boon to me with those issues are, one, If I can lean into the description in a way that it engages me, or and what engages me most is horrifying my players. So if I see if I can describe it in a way where like my players start to shrink a little, like where jaws drop, I know then I'm engaged. I want to keep that ball rolling. So working on playing into like your own, what your fun is going to be. But also with the advent of like virtual tabletops and virtual character trackers and things along those lines, I offload so much rules bandwidth onto my players now. You know, I don't know the last time I looked up a spell that I wasn't having an NPC cast. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Oh, you're going to cast Magic Missile? What's that do? Why don't you read that to me on your D&D Beyond, where you just click it and it tells you what it does, you know?
Yeah.
And,
no longer
and
have to
have
flip
them
through a
do
book.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what Malice is saying here in the chat is kind of a good point. You know, us talking about diseases and poisons in particular, he's saying that they're often better bits of story than they are carrier damage. And yeah, I guess it's a different way of treating it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest roadblock, I think, and that's why in Dead Man's Rust, we came up with this kind of bolt-on bonus mechanic, is the fact that you hit a certain threshold and they just aren't a problem anymore. They magically are no longer an issue for anyone in your party. You know, I think it's I can't remember what level, but comes a certain point where like if you're playing a paladin, like people near you don't get diseases. You know? It's like
start kicking in. Yeah. What happens is there's like a real sweet spot where you can throw one at the party in a normal 5e game, and it's kind of an issue. And then the next level, they get spells that take care of it. And for about 2 levels, they have to take that spell. And by the time you're past that point, then DMs quit using it. Then you never have to take that spell again.
Yeah,
I have to play a druid. It's in my spell selection. I walk right past it every time and pick up something else that I think is going to be more universally useful. Like every time I go, like I've never taken to text poisons with Bowrin. It's never happened. Like,
but I'll tell you what though, another couple of little tricks I like to keep in my bag. I am a huge fan of counter spells. I am a huge fan of anti-magic fields. I am a huge fan of inflicting limited areas and limited time frames where like that thing you were counting on having that you just walked in here like you didn't have to think tactically because you had this one spell prepared. Sorry, that's gone now. You know, so let's fall back and think about what we're gonna do. You know, that's always fun too. If you're in a position where somebody's getting ready to like cast a spell to clean off an infection or get rid of a disease, if somebody's there that can counterspell that, or if there's some way to magically interfere with it, that's always fun.
I know this last campaign of ours, our DM started counterspelling Jeff's characters
aggressively
regularly. It was like, felt bad for him. He wasn't ever counting a spell at me. He was just backing Jeff with it every time. I was like, oh man, that's brutal.
I come to expect
good thing he forgot I cast spells.
Well, yeah, and there's something about the earlier discussion there. We're talking about like class features and spells and stuff coming online, and in particular the paladin. It's an interesting balancing act to play as a DM to know like that a character has a certain ability that makes that class special in a certain way, and you almost feel like obligated to throw opportunities for them to show off those abilities. And then on the flip side, it also makes it trivial. So like there's kind of a weird sweet spot, but I think like with what you're describing here, with having a true ritually caused disease, you can have that one that's an example of one that doesn't go away, but then still introduce other diseases that then they have a solution for to throw a harder contrast.
Right, exactly. And you can also, and that also, with the true ritual mechanic specifically, you're building in a quest at that point, right? This disease has a cause. We need to go find that cause, and then we can cure the disease. But there's other ways that you can tackle that too. If you wanted to go a different route, it wouldn't be much of a twist to the knob to say, this thing is going to be resistant to magic unless I can get a hold of X component that I wouldn't normally use in a spell, right?
Yeah.
Some rarer thing, you know, and that's something you can just choose to do as a DM. You know, I mean, that's something you can just homebrew, like, hey, you got sewer rot, but unfortunately, this strain of sewer rot can only be cured if you ingest the you know, the moss from these trees that are in the deadly haunted forest before you cast the cure disease on yourself. So, you know, go get the moss.
Yeah, I like those sorts of things. I think that makes it feel more magical. That feels more lived in the world instead of just like I have a box of tools and I just hit it with a hammer and it goes away. You know, like
that's straight up just almost pushing to the point of being like, hey, instead of casting the spell, let's do medicine checks. Like,
wait, people use medicine? Medicine checks? What is that on the sheet? I didn't know that was part 5e.
There's a skill for something like that, right? Isn't there medicine or healing there?
Is that the ability that doesn't restore hit points or help you with anything medicine related? Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
That's the one you took the herbalism kit for. Remember that? Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Right, but you can then start too leaning on those checks and making those things then become important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, another optional thing, like you bring up medicine checks. We don't do this in Scarred Lands, but I have done this at my table before, where in order for someone to magically alleviate a condition, they had to successfully diagnose it.
Oh.
So they would need to make a medicine check at a DC that I would set. Usually it'd be like the save DC of the condition itself.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to say, oh, I know what that is. I can fix it this way with this spell. So that spell isn't just hocus pocus, now you're fine. That spell is in and of itself a toolkit, but you have to know how to use those tools to go in and fix it.
Yeah, I like those sorts of ideas. That's cool. It's almost like kind of tying a skill to a ritual almost, like.
Yeah,
which I think is the approach they were kind of doing in the Pathfinder 2e, if I'm remembering correctly. You know, like where you can use that, you know, as a medicine. You can use it as like an Arcana check if that's appropriate, you know, or nature to know like types of animals or plants or whatever. You know, I think that's a cool approach because, like, as is, the skill system feels like it gets trivialized by magic almost immediately. And there are certain classes that are so dependent on skills as their gimmick that it feels weird that those are so quickly replaced.
There's like 4 or 5 what I like to call noble skills that you pretty much always have to have, and the rest are kind of like, if you know, maybe you'll use them now and then. It's like you got to have your like perception and your
right.
You know, everybody has the perceptions at the top of the list, right?
That's
like,
S tier.
You can't go anywhere without perception, and then usually some sort of like intellect, like know things check, and that's usually about all the further you got to go with your religion. You know, if you're a paladin or whatever. But
see, I just saw Malice say in chat, "Why use persuasion when I have a dozen charm spells?" This is one place where I'm going to absolutely pat 5e on the back. 5e is very good in its base mechanic at making charm a band-aid solution.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's fine in the moment, but you better hope that you get far enough away from that person that they forget you exist before it wears off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I've had situations where I've created long-term arch enemies from people casting friends on someone. You know what I mean? Like you hit me at a very vulnerable time in a very, very trespassing sort of fashion. I'm going to find you 10 levels later and break into the inn where you're sleeping and put a pillow on your face.
I'm not going to tell you guys that my current character took friends as a cantrip and all sorts of disguising himself tricks purposefully to piss people off at certain targets or anything like that. That's maybe not a sus move that I'll do later.
And again,
he was tough, so we're not surprised.
and none of this is about stealing the thunder from the player or stealing the cool of their power.
Yeah.
To my mind, it's about making it an interesting engagement and making every one of these choices. If you're out in adventuring in this fantasy high stakes world, your choices should have consequences. Choices should be weighed.
Yeah.
And sure, it's fun to go into a dungeon and kick indoors and kill monsters and take their stuff, but if you're getting into anything that's at all heavier than that, which most games I think do, you want to have a little bit of like, I can cast this spell. Is that the right play in this situation? You know what I mean? Not just because am I going to run out of spell slots and then not be able to fight the dragon later on, but like, how might this bite me in the ass, or how might this, how might I be shortcutting where I should be stopping and paying attention? And I think as a GM, you've sort of hit that sweet spot when your players start asking you for additional skill checks in situations like that, where the rules as written are just like, you cast the spell and this thing happens, and there you go. But they're like, can I investigate this situation? Can I make sure we're not carrying, something infected with us? Can I, now that I've charmed this person, can I try to spend a little time working on them so that I can soften the blow when this spell wears off? Things like that.
So I think is it safe to say then maybe the pacing is maybe one of the key ingredients into this is a matter of pacing. When you're talking about your spell slots and everything that revitalize during rest periods or sleeping overnight, like when you're getting your spell selections back through those methods, is there a certain amount of pacing that has to be involved in order to get to that point where the players are looking at skill checks for things? Because otherwise, I just got 5 spells back, so I get to reuse this one again. Is that a key component, you think?
I think it's important, and I think it's definitely one of the big levers you can turn. You can also, obviously you can go with alternate rest rhythms and stuff like that, too. But I think that some of it is just creating enough situations where if you can craft a situation where if the players sort of breeze through with the path of least resistance, it almost reliably will bite them in the ass. You just condition them to do it whether they need to or not. You know what I mean? If they've kind of coasted through the first 2/3 of a dungeon to spend the last third on the ropes begging for life enough, they learn to take those first steps more carefully. I guess, to put it in a blunt sort of situation, but you can do the same thing narratively. You can do the same thing with things like disease, with things like survival, especially when you're dealing with a world. And this is one of the things I love about Scarred Lands. Specifically, you're dealing with a world where you don't know. One of my biggest complaints, I guess, about Forgotten Realms is the conceit is that every first level adventurer that picks up a backpack and a wooden sword knows all the lore of the setting, knows who Elminster is and how awesome they are, knows, we'll be fine. We just have to stumble our way over to Amphale and I can get somebody to heal us. It's this world where there are so many certainties baked into it. I think it's not only your job, but your duty as a game master to strip away as much certainty as possible. You don't want them to fall back on like, I know this is going to be fine because of X, Y, and Z. And Scarred Lands does that really well because the whole place is so that something terrible happened over in this other area, and that there's horrid side effects to it. That's what that's the comfort you get, is knowing that you're walking into a flaming undead infested hell or something like that.
I don't know which hell it is, but I know I'm going to hell, and that's all that matters.
Is it safe to say, though, that maybe there's also a small bit of relief that the current hell ends? Like, man, we're leaving the toxic dead area. We're going into the not cool area, but at least it's not toxic death area for a while. Like,
absolutely. And one of my favorite aspects of the setting, and again, I really I feel like Jason Newsted. You know what I mean? I feel like the fan that got to join the band
Right.
That's really my feelings on Scarland. So when I gush about it, it's not. It really is like sincere, like fanboying. But one of the things I love about it is that despite all of that, it's Grimbright. Like everything sucks, but you might be the heroes to set something right, and that might be on a global level, or that might be just in your corner of your village. And I think that a good GM will carrot and stick that quite a bit, but will make those moments pay off.
Yeah.
Particularly if the players are engaging in that kind of, I guess, narrative enhancing play, where they're looking at things from different angles. Where they're, I'm not saying that the relationship needs to be adversarial, but where they're really kind of exploring the world and bringing the world to life with the details they're seeking out.
Yeah.
And I think that can be good fodder for improv at the table too, in terms of the GM. The players coming up with all sorts of monstrosity and horror that you never would have thought to put in their way. But now that you mention it,
Well, you run into stuff like that, and you also run into reactions at the table to things that maybe were misinterpreted from what you were expecting, but end up being better than what you were expecting, and you're like, oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
That's something that they felt. There was something there that was tangible. So let's go ahead and pick up that ball and run it into the goal, make it into something good. I'm trying to think of any real obvious examples of that, but they do come up every once in a while. And I think at least around our table, we tend to have some good moments with our DMs that pick those moments up and make them into something special. Or like critical failures and stuff that end up putting you in a precarious spot that suddenly you're in a weird situation you never expected to be in. You're making decisions, and maybe it's not the one you wanted, but there it is.
Well, and one. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Was it?
I say, go ahead. You're fine.
Oh no, I was going to say, like earlier today on a stream, the players. I got a party of 6, and they're 4th level. And I put them up against these creatures called haglings. So they're these little sort of mini hags. I described them to the players during game as an unholy marriage between a Muppet and a Cenobite.
Oh, God.
So they're kind of these
Muppet Hellraiser. Seriously? God.
Yeah, pretty much. They're these little, almost childlike creatures. They're children that hags turn before they reach puberty. So they're little childlike creatures. But they're like the particular type of haglings they were fighting are blind because their eyes get plucked out, and then they get the flesh of their first meal turned into their armor. Ooh. So they have like blindfolds that are like a strip of thigh flesh that's like stapled to their face, basically. Their breastplate is like hide armor, but it's like someone's face that's been taxidermied.
Like Travis Legge Fraggle Rock. Like, make that happen. Gee, those things are already creepy. Now I want you to take them, go do something with them. I mean, wow, that's...
Yeah.
Travis is rooting for the doozers. Going down, Fraggles.
I would love nothing more. It would be a blast. But these are like CR 1/2 creatures, right? And they have horrific appearance, as one might imagine with the description. And we just had a run of bad saving throws, which led to one of the most amusing sessions I've had in recent memory. Just because these people who are theoretically, they're 4th level, they've just come into their own. Everybody just got their first ASI or their first feat, right? Like they're feeling like, they're on top of the world. And these little CR 1/2 critters are just running circles around them, terrifying them. They can't do anything to save their lives. And then when they are hitting, it was another one of those like laws of probabilities mutating at the table. So it's like every attack is a botch or a crit.
Yeah. I've lived those sessions.
In play too.
God, this happened a lot lately. I don't know what the deal is with those, but man, they create some really interesting scenes. Because I can imagine this hag situation, this 4th level party gets essentially beaten down by these little tiny guys and gets Gulliver's traveled, They're just kind of hanging around.
Pretty much.
All right, so now we get a role-playing opportunity we weren't expecting. Maybe they don't eat us immediately.
Well, and the little critters were really just unbeknownst to the players, they were trying to steal valuables so that they could eat. So they're running around, one of them wound up stealing a couple of bedrolls from their campsite, and one of them stole one of the players' bows.
That was
and they
a mistake.
got away. That was a mistake. So now they're going to spend the next 3 sessions hunting down these little haglings, I'm sure, over their regular ass short bow.
No weapon left behind. That's just a standard rule of all 5e is no piece of equipment gets to just wander off. It's got to
bedroll. Yeah. Take a man's bow.
Right, exactly. So, but that's an example. I guess the short version of the long story I just told is that's an example of couple little things you can do at the table to make that a memorable and challenging encounter. Yes, the dice helped, right? But introducing them in such a way, even the ones who made their saves weren't necessarily thrilled about the idea of getting up in these things' faces.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it can be a challenge sometimes to paint that picture for people where it actually really sinks in, because you face a lot of monsters in game, and because you're the player and you're separated from the event, the feeling of being horrified by a monster oftentimes misses. But if you get those rare moments where your description lands hard, you describe the feelings of what the character is going through as they're seeing this creature, if you can get that player to buy in, that makes an awesome scene. Because even after the effect wears off, maybe the fear effect wears off, they're couple 30 feet away or something. Most players just run back in and go back in the fight, but maybe you don't.
Could 5e maybe just in general amongst its settings benefit from maybe some horror artist to come in and work on some of the monsters manuals? Do you feel like maybe sometimes they just hey, it's a zombie and it looks like every zombie you've ever seen in your whole life? Is there a possibility that maybe they just need a little more of a to make some of the monsters just look a little meaner than what they normally do?
That's one of the core artistic philosophies of Scarred Lands. If you look at the creature collection, going back to the original 3rd edition creature collection, those didn't look like monster manual monsters. Those looked like they crawled out of someone's nightmare. Right. And they still do. And every project that I work on as the developer, I have a boilerplate piece of text that goes into the art notes that gets sent off that describes how the world looks like Frank Frazetta paintings in Heavy Metal magazine. And it has to all the time.
Yeah.
And the people need to be, even the prettiest people in Scarred Lands need to have scars and blemishes. They live a hard life. They live in a hard place. When the one place where I break with sort of the Frazetta wisdom is when we talk about people's clothing, making sure that most of the time people can be wearing super revealing clothing. That happens a lot in Scarred Lands art, but that it's designed for form. It's designed for function and comfort, not to look sexy. Something if a female barbarian who's wearing a loincloth and a strap of cloth around her chest is wearing that because she's in a desert that's 120 degrees, that's not going to lift and pull the way that someone who's working as an exotic dancer, that their clothing is going to. You know what I mean? Right. So showing that through the art, I think, also helps, right? Because it's you can maintain that epic sort of heavy metal album cover vibe, but also pepper in those contrasts, those realisms, and those terrifying and horrifying things.
Yeah, I think the art does a lot of work, heavy lifting and setting the tone for, and particularly like an environmental thing. Like I think back to looking at Dark Sun content, the artwork really sets you there. Like you knew this is a harsh environment even before you read any part of the book. You knew that the deserts were dangerous. You knew that the people there were rugged and harsh, and that they're not going to necessarily treat you well, because they're a lot like the land they're from. And I feel like that's the same kind of thing that you'll pick up from the Scarredlands stuff. If you see that kind of artwork, you know what you're getting to. Yeah.
The reason I brought it up is because those things you were describing a minute ago, like, if you were to peel all of the description off and you just set a stat block up there and you're like, hey, I'm going to challenge my 4th level party with a few of these things, we'd look at you and be like, you're nuts. Those things really have CR challenge rating monsters. Like, they can't possibly harass a 4th level party enough. But, like, then you strap on the description of them, you strap on what they are, and just a few failed attack rolls is all it takes before all of a sudden a 4th level party's like, okay, I don't know what I'm dealing with. These things are weird. There's something not going on here that's normal. Like, it immediately wigs them out. And sometimes maybe even just that bit of description. And this is where I got back to maybe where the art kind of comes in a little bit. Like, if you look in a Monsters Manual and you see a goblin, you're trying to describe a goblin, you're going to describe what you see and to your players. You may not turn the picture on. Here's what you're looking at, guys. Like, you may describe it in some way. So that's where I was just wondering, as like and you were saying that Scarredlands, it seems like, does this, like, takes that intensity. When you look at that, you're like, here's what I'm seeing, and this is the world it is, and this is what things should look like.
Very much so. And another thing, and this comes in, this is a tool that the DM can apply at the table, but also a tool that we look to from a design perspective is taking things, if you can hit a sweet spot in a description or in the mechanic of a power, in a creature's ability that is exceptionally repulsive or horrifying to think about, and then give the players an opportunity to take that breath and think about it. One of the most terrifying creatures in all of Scarredlands, that it will cause players to douse their drawers at the sight of them, is a CR 1/4 swarm of what's called flesh strippers. And what makes flesh strippers so scary is that when they bite you, their saliva is anesthetic.
Yeah.
So you suddenly you have to make a con save, and if you fail that save, you are unaware of any hit point loss or conditions you suffer.
Yeah.
So you might look down, and all of a sudden half your arm is gone because this thing has been eating your arm off. And you just didn't notice.
Oh, that is brutal.
My druid ran into one of those once, I think.
Yeah.
I looked down and my arm was missing, so I'm pretty sure that's what they were.
Yeah, that is dark. Like that kind of plays back also to that acid thing, right? So like, do you tell your player, mark a hit point, mark a hit point, mark a hit point, or is that like hidden details behind the scenes and behind your screen, and all of a sudden you reveal it to them whenever they find it? Do you have a way to handle it?
I think a good way, if you're doing something where you're building up like a reveal, absolutely you track that behind your screen, and then you say, okay, and now I'm a big fan of, like, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to paint a narrative picture for you of what has just happened to you, and then tell you to apply damage or tell you to apply a condition.
Yeah.
And I really think that is a storytelling technique that, I mean, maybe I'm not stumbling on anything. I don't think I'm stumbling on anything like profound necessarily, but I do think it's something I've seen DMs not do, which is lead with your narrative and then apply your system. And I think that right there goes a long way to building that player buy-in, because they're reacting to it, and there is a part of them that's thinking in the back of their mind, oh God, how many hit points does that do?
You get to hold on to that suspense for 5 seconds, and then you're like, 2 damage.
Right. And then see, and that triggers a whole bunch of reactions in them, right? Because then they're like, well, if that was only 2 hit points, what if it rolls a 10? You know?
Yeah, I do. That creature is that's a good creature. Because like I'm thinking like the rest of the campaign after you run into him the first time, you constantly have people checking you for those things.
Oh yeah,
Bill,
yeah,
do you have
like...
you have your flesh leeches on you today? No, okay, well, we're good. You know, it's like looking for ticks or something, you know.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's, to me, that's a mark of a good encounter, but it's also a cool setting element. If you can introduce something when the characters are first, second, third level, that they are referring back to when they are 15th level. Like, did you check the bedrolls for flesh strippers? Like, we're about to plane shift over to the negative energy. I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, falling asleep near those things, you're done, right?
Like, we don't need no hitchhikers.
Oh, no, man, that would be horrible. Yeah, that is a very effective creature.
You're just like, you don't want to. It's like introducing the carp into the rivers in Illinois, right? Like the Asian grass carps that they let you just go up there and blow up a dynamite, like just to get them out of the ecosystem. That's like what you're doing with those when you go plane shift anywhere. You're like, no, we can't take those into that area. That's not cool. Like they don't need that in their lives already. It's already bad enough.
Exactly.
Oh man. Yeah, okay, so if that's an example of a 1/4 creature from Scarred Lands, are there any others that are that disturbing? Like, because that seems like that one's going to stick with me as a, I'm going to check for those now in our game, just to make sure that's not happening.
They don't even exist in our world. We're going to check
yet.
Anyway, just so you know.
Yet, you just wait.
Right, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah.
On the safe side.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of disturbing creatures. I like... I very much enjoy some of the stuff that comes out of the Blood Sea environment. There are these creatures called blood barnacles, and they, in and of themselves, aren't actually damaging, like in the sense of doing hit point damage or inflicting conditions on you. But if you get them on your ship and you don't do something about them, they will just slowly turn your crew into blood zombies. Just because enough of them are around, and you have to make enough Constitution saves while you're marooned out on the Blood Sea, that eventually someone will lose, and then eventually they'll either bite somebody or somebody else will fail a save. You know, it's kind of that creeping horror of like, yeah, it's just this thing. So like now you come into a situation where it's an environmental problem. It's we have to find a way to stop this boat, get off of it into this incredibly dangerous environment that turns everything that touches this water into a raging monster, pretty much, and clean our ship off. Of these little creatures that are CR0, have 1 hit point, I think, each. You know, but they have become a real problem for your campaign now, and that's regardless of level.
I'm telling you, everyone in the chat, this sort of thing is what scares a player. Because, like, you know, you go up to a bag of hit points, it does tons of damage, like a Minotaur or something. You're like, whatever, it's a Minotaur, I'll punk him in the face, you know. Psh, and you don't think about the Minotaur ever again. But these little bastards, man, that would haunt you for the rest of the campaign. Like, you never want to go into a boat.
I'm now almost solely convinced that Travis never hit CR2 monsters.
No.
Its entire 20 levels of campaign is just plaguing you with these incredibly insidious little half CR creatures. Just maybe more of them show up or more often. He never hits CR2. It's all.
One of the best things about those, though, is that you really only have to bring those things on stage once or twice.
Yep.
And then you have to mention them again.
Yeah, mention it, and
they become a haunting presence that you never really have to. Now, full disclosure, because my players are extremely damaged on my Monday Night Scarred Lands campaign, when they ran into flesh strippers, they domesticated them and are now breeding them.
Oh God!
Because they're
hell of a biological weapon.
Saliva's, well, no, their saliva is an incredibly valuable anesthetic for medical practitioners.
Right? I just thought they were the genetic of Scarred Lands. They just walk around with these deadly creatures. There's just got like 100 of them.
Oh man!
I mean, this group has never found a creature they didn't try to adopt.
It's one of those crews.
I'm sure that once they catch up with those haglings, they're going to wind up with one of them.
Oh, we can turn this one back. You know, it's just poor, unfortunate little kid. He's misunderstood.
See, in our games, we have the opposite problem. Yep. The locals adopt us.
And then we spend the rest of the time trying to kick them out.
And we try to get rid of them. They just keep coming back. Like
that's fair. That happens.
Weird.
I mean, and as you're moving up the CR chain, like you get into again, it becomes about one of the things I love about the Scarred Lands monster design is that the monsters are steeped in the lore without you having to be, without the player having to be steeped in the lore to understand what that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a group of undead, I think they're CR1 or CR2, called Chardoon Slain. And Chardoon is the god of, he's the general of the gods, but he's also the god of servitude and slavery. And what will happen is if soldiers under his service die under the right circumstances,
mm-hmm.
They will raise from the dead a year and a day after their death to complete their mission. Oftentimes they don't quite remember what that mission is. They'll get Swiss cheese memory about what they're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. They'll confuse, say, for example, a band of adventurers for their enemies. Or they'll confuse a band of adventurers for the people they were supposed to be escorting to a location, and then become very insistent that they take you to that location. So that's another thing where it's like, this has the air of familiarity because they're sort of white-like,
mm-hmm.
but they're also very different, and it's a very cool twist on it because now they have a drive,
right?
And that's something that the players can interact with, for better or worse.
Yeah, that's something that really helps with monsters because a lot of times, you just run into a monster and it's just a monster. You're like, what is that?
Right.
Oh, it's an orc. Okay, what are orcs? They're guys that raid people. Okay, cool, done. But you think of like classical, or not classical monsters necessarily, but like monsters that kind of stick out to you from different media. I'm thinking like Silent Hill as an example, right? And like Pyramid Head.
Mm-hmm.
Like you start to think of like what Pyramid Head's whole deal is, like what's the underlying story of the mythos of this character, like what's he doing, what's he represent, that kind of stuff. And that has more of an effect on the players, I find, than, just the guy comes out and hits you with a sword. Like the build up to it, the reveal of like, oh, I ran into this guy and then we got away from him and then we find out this information about it and now we know more what's going on. And wow, that was actually scarier than we realized. Those sorts of moments.
Right. And Scarred Lands has no shortage of tragedy in its backstory.
Mm-hmm.
And that I find is fun. And unless you have the murderest of murder hobos, I think it's fun to drop some moral dilemmas in their lap. There's a creature called the In-White. They are children who died of some sort of deprivation. Maybe they were neglected, they starved, maybe they froze to death, whatever. They died hungry and wanting.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will go into cities at night and look for adults to curl up next to for comfort.
Ooh.
And as they do, they drain hit dice from you.
Wow.
And this is such a problem that if you go into major cities in Scarred Lands, when you rent your room, they offer you to pay a salt tax because they can't cross a line of unbroken salt. So they will then, you pay the extra copper and they give you a bag of salt to put around your bed at night so In-Whites don't come crawl into bed with you.
Oh, that's nice.
It's common enough that that's like a regular practice.
I heard you say something there that the only thing that can make this thing more terrifying for me, or probably any 5e player, is this thing curls up next to you and you can't use your hit dice to heal during your rest.
Right.
Instead of stealing hit dice, what I heard in my head was it's stealing your hit dice that you use during your rest. Like this thing just curls up and then you can't use your hit dice. I'm like, no, I woke up and I still suck. Like,
yeah, I mean that's kind of what happens. Yeah. And I'm a big fan of mechanics that target stuff that's not normally targeted, like your hit dice.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing goes after your hit dice in 5e.
So when you said hit
something
dice,
goes
you
after-
meant the hit dice.
Yeah, I meant the hit dice. Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I just thought I heard that wrong. I was thinking
No.
I was right on. That's exactly what it does.
Yeah, that's what it does.
You were dead on. Yeah, it takes your hit dice. And at the end of the day, too, that does a specific type of harm that you are not used to experiencing as a player.
Well, it
you
does
can't
a
respond
special
that.
psychological harm too, because there is an element there. If you know what they are, what the issue is, these ghosts are looking for comfort. They're looking for you as you're a good person that they trust, but their presence hurts you. Like that puts you in a real awkward spot real fast.
Right. Because
I
you
like
don't
that.
want to just kill them,
Yeah.
Or maybe you do.
Yeah, and then you find out something
but-
about the characters real quick.
The real injustice is when your asshole pirate friend wakes up and he's perfectly fine because he ain't a good person. I don't understand what's wrong with you guys. Everything's going great. Like,
Right, yeah,
kids
nobody-
don't like me. Who knew? It's
Best
all
night of
right.
sleep he's had all this year. Yeah.
Exactly. There's a creature called a strife elemental
Mhm.
that basically is created from just all of the misery of the divine war
Mhm.
and roams around and just will possess people and sort of use its powers to make everyone around them more agitated.
Mhm.
So you can have a whole urban. One of my favorite things to do in Skylands when they go into like a small village, and just slowly all of these nice sort of salt of the earth, folksy townspeople just start becoming really just hostile, and not like I'm going to attack you hostile, just shitty to them.
Mhm.
And then they start having to make saves. Otherwise, they're having shitty reactions and they don't know why. And so figuring out like what is happening here
Yeah.
then becomes a whole plot. And once you find it, you can kill it pretty easily. But, it messes with you. And I love that sort of a mechanic.
Yeah, I like those kind of things too. Where the monster isn't just a bag of hit points to be killed. It's like a mystery. There's a process to it. I really like the idea that you were kind of bringing up earlier with like the rituals and stuff, and coming up with specialized components or whatever to affect a certain thing. I really like the idea of having monsters or entities or whatever you want to call them, NPCs, that you need to discover, research, figure out some kind of unique
Puzzle
weakness.
monsters.
Yeah, I find those
Puzzle
really
monsters.
interesting.
I mean, that's what you call them, puzzle monsters. That's what they technically are at that point.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because I, as both as a developer and as a GM, and even to a greater degree as a player, I hate like puzzles. Like I don't want to solve riddles.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I don't want to play Connect Four so that I can get into a room. That's the worst experience I could ever possibly have at a D&D table.
I think I'm the only person I know that likes puzzles. Go
Oh,
on.
they drive me mad. But I do love a good mystery.
Me
And
too.
so when you have a creature that is built around either figuring out why it is the way it is, or a certain set of conditions you have to meet to destroy it. Give you another example from the creature collection. A creature called the Alley Reaper.
Okay.
And the Alley Reaper is created when an assassin dies with the blood of an innocent person on their hands.
Mm.
So it's a very specific set of circumstances that creates an Alley Reaper. You can stop an Alley Reaper. You can beat it down temporarily, but it will keep coming back unless you find it at the moment that it rises before the sun, because it rises at night. So you have to be there when it rises. Before the sun goes over the horizon, you have to put it down. You have to be able to kill it in that span of time. So it's usually like a minute you have to kill this thing. Otherwise, it just comes back the next night, just as strong as ever and just as deadly as ever.
Nice.
And they often they collect trinkets from their victims. So like it might be like, you find this trinket on the ground and you're like, oh, that's an interesting little thing. And you pick it up and you're carrying it around. And now for the rest of the campaign, until you figure out what's going on, you have this alley reaper after you forever. And so you put 2 and 2 together, like it's that little statue that I found, in a sewer that looked neat or whatever,
Nice.
So that's to me super fun because it's a thing that you can beat on it, you can put it down, you can inconvenience it, but it's basically like sicking Jason Voorhees on your party.
Right.
Like you're not gonna stop it until you find the right mix.
Got that, kind of almost Freddy Krueger kind of style to it.
Yeah.
Just show him back up and can't ever figure out how to permanently get rid of it.
Well, and from a design standpoint, I really like the way you approach that because it's not just a puzzle monster where the normal means of combat are completely done away with. They need not apply. It's a puzzle in addition to needing the usual tactics and style of your party. So like it gives you both things in a way, and I think that's the secret sauce. It's not take away the thing, but add some extra flavor to it. I really like that.
Yeah. And it gives opportunities too, again, for like people. You use the role play and the investigation to latch onto these things and to discover these things. But then where the rubber meets the road, those characters who are maybe more adept at just hitting things and making them bleed, or, I'm going to blow up this undead thing because I'm a really strong cleric, they get to shine too, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's a hallmark of good monster design too, is where you can find a way to engage the whole party in solving that problem. Maybe not the fight itself. Maybe when it comes down to time to scrap this thing down, maybe your rogue and your bard just sit way back and shout encouraging words at you.
Yeah.
But
they did the legwork at some point that puts you in the right position. Yeah.
Right. Kind of drawing on the ensemble.
Yeah, it's very valuable. I'm kind of curious, Chad, any particular monster that you've encountered really just sent your mind in a unique creative place, that you felt like it was really compelling in how it was presented? And if so, what was a description that really set that off for you?
I know for me, like I said, I just created a story path for another system, and there was a monster in there that was very much a puzzle monster and became the core for my first adventure. And I just had a group just finish it last week, and they figured it out. And it was kind of rewarding to see them eventually figure out, like, oh, this is what we have to do, and this is what we have to do to beat this thing. And they came up with it on their own just from the investigation part that they had done. So like hearing about this, like Alley Reapers, like that's right in my wheelhouse for things I like to use. Like, maybe even more so than the ghost kids that crawl up and eat your hit dice. Like that's in my wheelhouse too. Don't get me wrong, but like this is, but those are definitely things. Like I said, I've over the last few years, I've kind of steered away a little bit from standard fantasy D&D when I go to run my games. And we have a long history of the World of Darkness. I think that has corrupted my soul a long time ago. That has made going back to straight fantasy hard for me.
Yeah, it did its work.
Well,
but I think that this stuff like this is a nice middle ground, somewhere I could probably find myself wanting to sit down and play with as a GM, maybe even like create adventures and stuff for it. Like,
well, and let's be real here. I mean, Scarred Lands is birthed from the D&D campaign of the cats that made the World of Darkness. You know what I mean? Like all these monsters that showed up in the first creature collection were stuff that Rich Thomas and Stu Wick used in their home D&D campaigns. And they saw an opportunity. The whole reason that creature collection happened the way it did, they saw an opportunity when the OGL dropped, because there was such a lag between the DM's guide and the monster manual. They were like, well, let's just take all the shit that we came up with at home and throw it together in a monster book, and we can beat the monster manual to press.
Nice.
And so, I mean, the sensibilities that went into those creatures are the same sensibilities that built the World of Darkness. So I would say, and this is a big thing that a nut that I'm always trying to crack is the Scarred Lands developer. If you're like never touched a D&D book and you're dyed in the wool World of Darkness fan, I think if you stepped into Scarred Lands as your first experience, you would find it far more comfortable than, say, trying to sit down and play Ghosts of Saltmarsh or go through like a Forgotten Realms adventure, just because it would feel to a degree like home.
A dark, nasty home.
Right. And that's not to cast any aspersions on those worlds or whatever.
No.
Those worlds are awesome, but I'm saying
absolutely.
it will feel familiar.
They're just too bright, vibrant, and full of color. I don't know.
Well, and I think there's something very visceral about World of Darkness and what you're describing for the Scarred Lands. It's they've done a really good job, it sounds like, of just infusing character and narrative first, and then stat lines after. And as much of a nuts and bolts player as I am, those are the things I really gravitate towards. Is if you give me a good narrative-driven monster or creature or NPC or whatever, I'm all in. Like that'll hook me.
It's the marriage of the two. I think that's where Jeff is more in the sweet spot probably than I am. Sometimes I can get lost in the narrative, and I don't care what the stats sometimes look like, as long as the narrative's good. I don't care quite so much. But like anytime that you can pitch me a good narrative, and then there's a certain amount of mechanics that help reinforce that, like that's the sweet spot I know where I like to try to land. And I don't always hit there, but that's what I always shoot for. So it sounds like that's the approach that was taken with Scarred Lands.
Very much so. And the other thing I want to, I guess, just make sure I communicate to people, maybe especially those who maybe haven't encountered it before, is that philosophy applies equally to your playable options, right? So, for example, all of the races in Scarred Lands are designed to be a little bit hardier than maybe you would find in a base 5e adventure, because they live in a harsh world. But the way the world building is baked into the interactions between these species, the idea that out of the playable races that you find in the player's guide, basically split down the middle. Half of them were on the side of the gods during the Titans War, and half of them were on the side of the Titans. And the ones who were on the side of the Titans, the playable options are what's called redeemed. They basically surrendered at the end of the war. So you have like orcs that, when the war was done, was like, our bad, we'll play nice now. And then it also reveals that while the orcs have this reputation, much as they do on other D&D worlds, of being these horribly violent, brutish, monstrous creatures, turns out they're just really good at fighting, but they have this very deep culture that's rooted in astrology, and many of them have like story, their entire life story tattooed on their body in the shape of the constellations that were above them when things happened.
Cool.
And it's a very rich spiritual culture. It's very cool. But until the end of the Divine War, nobody knew that because they were just too busy getting killed by orcs. You know what I mean? So playing through that, because this is a relatively recent, the war only ended 150 years ago. And this isn't the age of the internet. Like you might come to a village where the humans have never seen an orc that wasn't in battle, so sort of dealing with some of those repercussions and how those interactions and the social influences of those things can become very, to my mind, a very comfortable space for like a World of Darkness player to slide into. Because those are the kinds of things you use to incorporating into your character.
Yeah, dancing around those like questions of morally gray scenarios and troubled past and that kind of stuff. That feels real familiar. Is like the whole thing of World of Darkness games, for anyone who may not have played them, is that you're playing the stereotypical bad guys. You're not necessarily playing the heroes, and so you have immediately a task ahead of you of trying to understand where you fit, like what it is that you are trying to achieve. What motivates you in particular, because it's not necessarily just doing the right thing.
Right.
And it seems like, when you get in those worlds, you get a much deeper sense of who your character is. And,
right.
I don't know, their attachment to the plot, I feel is stronger, you know, because you know why they in particular have approached this plot.
Right,
and there's an investment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like we always say about like the best villains are the ones that think they're right.
Yep.
So your best PCs when you're in these situations are ones that are doing what they think is right, even if it's not. And that's a tough thing to sometimes pull off. But
right, and you know, Scarred Lands doesn't shy away from. It would be very easy for it to be a world where if they served the gods, they were good people, and if they served the Titans, they were bad, and that's just how that goes. Scarred Lands does not shy away from that being not the case. The humans are the most populous divine race on Gelspad, and arguably responsible for the most current strife on the continent. You know, the largest country is the Classian hegemony, which is a human supremacist, expansionist empire that functions on a slave economy. Their king worships Chardoon, the god of slavery. They're not nice people, you know, and so this whole idea, it turns the idea of D&D that like humans equals good very much on its ear, you know, and really makes you question sort of your judgments about people based on appearance, you know, because you might be this big scary orc that's got, you know, huge bulging muscles and, you know, tusks, but you would never enslave another sentient being. That's evil, and that's the evil we have to go fight, you know. And you so
strike them down with a battle axe, but you never enslave.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, and it sounds like maybe the gods are a little differently done too, like more in like the kind of styling of like maybe Greek gods where they're flawed, or where they're more nuanced instead of just like, I'm the god of chivalry and goodness. You know, it's like, yeah, I'm the chivalrous good guy, but I have this other thing that seems out of place, but it's part of what makes me who I am.
Well, yes, that is definitely present. The sort of Greek flaw to the gods, but also one of the things I'm very excited about, and I'm hoping that we get a chance to explore a little bit more in the coming year or two, is the way the gods are aligned in Scarred Lands is very much tied to the planar, to their alignment, right? And to the planar representation of what that means. So by way of example, Hadrad, who is the lawful neutral god, is just a complete monster. Because this is the way the world is, and if you don't adhere to that, you are a failure. So he's just sort of everything you think about stuffy and rigid, and not in like a amusing way. Hadrad has very specific opinions on sexuality. Hadrad has very specific opinions on you know, on what time of day you consume your meals. And if you step out of line, you're fodder. That's not good. That's not fun, you know. There are like 3 gods that are kind of tolerable. The rest of them are really terrifying. My personal favorite god in the Pantheon is Vangel the Ravager, the chaotic evil god of destruction, because that's all he cares about. The pestilential abyss, the realm that he runs over, is constantly full of demons eating one another and vying for power, and he just sits around, gets bored with it, slaps people down who get too close to him, and you know, he's unique among the gods. All the other gods gain power from worship. He gains power from slaughter in his name. So his priests don't pray. His priests don't evangelize. His priests wage war and go on, you know, nationwide killing sprees for their god.
Yeah,
it's not a nice god.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I always like gods to have like kind of a mixed match of things that are like they fit together, like they work together. Like so, like something like poisoning and healing. You know, like
right.
It's a spectrum of life kind of in there. and then having adherents and stuff have to find their slice of what they like and what they discard the part that they don't like. So you have those like factions that kind of naturally form out of their churches. Like I always found those sorts of things to be really fascinating. You don't see a lot of that.
It's interesting. It's interesting, and it's an area that I would love to see some play happen with. In that this is basically the first, like the adventurers, the start date of the Scarlands Player's Guide is AV 150, 150 years after the end of the Divine War, after victory. This is the people who are adventuring now. Some of them might very well have been alive during the Divine War, but the shorter-lived races, especially, this is like the first generation of people who probably have never seen a god in person, right? Because during the Divine War, the gods were on the ground, shoulder to shoulder with the mortals. So there's not a lot of gray area about what a god said you're supposed to do. You could probably find somebody who heard them. You know, there's the telephone game has not had time yet to create like denominational splits and things like that. But it's just at the cusp of where that might begin, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that's very interesting. You know, you could play a character who's like, well, I want to be a lawful cleric of Hadrad, but I think we should be way more progressive about, you know, things like eating meat on a specific day of the week and who you marry. That could be a cool play space if you want to play that kind of game, right? And struggling against the structure that's there. So you can also get like super political in how these structures work, and really run it like something that you might traditionally attribute to a vampire game.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's very much politics and backstabbing and trying to get your little bit of influence off, and hope, you know, and once in a while it's interrupted by a ghost kid coming trying to snuggle up with you.
It's good stuff. So for people in the chat here, see Malice said that he always appreciated dragons mainly because they're highly intelligent. You know, he feels like, you know, you got to play them in a way that doesn't just pit their stats against you. Yeah, he also mentioned that he thinks the Scarland sounds like you've made it Australia the tabletop role playing game in terms of the bad guys.
Whenever I'm in doubt about creating a new creature, and this isn't just Scarlands, this is just work in general. Looking at pictures of animals from Australia is definitely one of my inspirations.
Just direct ports, done. So for the people in the chat here may not have come across this content before. You know, you're putting out new stuff in recent months and weeks even.
Yeah.
So what should they be looking for right now?
Well, the two big ones that I want to draw as much attention to as we can is Dead Man's Rust is on Kickstarter right now. And that is a campaign that is set to run from levels 1 to 10. But it's got a sandbox built around that. It covers 4 major areas in the middle of the continent of Gelspad. And it's got enough content. We just put out the way Onyx Path does their Kickstarters is we roll out the manuscript over the course of the campaign. We just put out the second preview today. In that preview, it covers an area called the Broadreach Horizon, which is where the Broadreach elves live. It's a little patch of pristine forest that's attached to the Hornsaw Forest, which is also known as the Forest of Blood. Within the Broadreach Horizon, there are 31 clans, including elves and the wood dwarfs. Each of those clans has 2 to 3 plot hooks involved with it, some of which tie to the main plot, some of which do not. So you're looking at between 60 and 90 side quests that went out in the update today, along with all of the stats for any of the NPCs you might encounter. So it is very much a sandbox that you can pull tools from, or you can run the main plot. Definitely want people checking that out on Kickstarter. Dead Man's Rust, it's amazing. I'm super proud of it. I say this with zero ego because it's entirely the strength of the team that I hired on it, but it's probably the best campaign book I've read for 5th edition. That's just because I really lucked out and got just amazing writers on it. it was a joy to watch it come together. And that we did fund already, so now we're in stretch goals.
Hell yeah, man! Congrats.
That's
Yeah,
excellent.
so that is super exciting. Right now we're about $180 shy of our next stretch goal. The first couple of stretch goals have been announced, and they're all about incorporating more virtual tabletop elements into the book.
Oh, handy.
So definitely,
okay.
definitely check that out. Because the way that'll work is, if you back for the PDF, you'll get all that stuff free, like it just as a bonus.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Do you know what the tiers?
The other thing is, I'm sorry.
Do you know what the tiers are off the top of your head? Tiers for Kickstarter.
Not off the top of my head, but I have it right in front of me. So, for example, you can, like, if you do $5, that'll get you manuscript access and gets you in on the pledge manager. So, like, if you're worried about the holidays or whatever, you can pledge for $5 right now. Check it out, and then, you know, even when it goes to backer kit, you can still go in and up your pledge, get the Kickstarter prices for things. So that is one cool option I always like to make people aware of. To get the PDF is at $20, and that'll get you. You also get the manuscript updates, and you also will get whatever stretch goals we activate for virtual tabletop will come with that as well.
Very nice.
And then you can for an extra $5, so $25, you get a discount for the print on demand when it goes live. Which is nice to have. And then 55 or more gets you the traditionally printed hardcover book. So it was one of the goals of the Kickstarter. One of the reasons we did it was so that we could do a traditional print run and get it into stores. We also have higher level tiers that allow you to name an NPC to get to be used as an art model.
Cool.
If you wanted to, like, send in pictures of yourself and we'll turn you into a horse person. And we also have there's two that are directly related to me, so I guess I want to brag on them a little bit. Whenever I develop a game, I try to do a tier where it's like, I'm going to run a 4-hour one shot on Twitch for people that don't normally, like, aren't part of the streaming community. So if you're just a fan and you want to come play on Twitch, there's a $300 pledge to get you everything underneath it, and you have me as a GM for a 4-hour session. If you've just been listening to this whole thing, you know, I mean, if that's what you want, if I haven't scared you off.
No, very cool. That's very awesome. That's a generous thing to do.
Then, it's fun. It's a privilege to be able to do it. And then we have the $350 pledge, which is new to this Kickstarter, which basically you hire me as your developer for a community content project for Scarred Lands. So you'll get all the stuff that was below it, plus I will work with you to put together something that you can then release on the Slurration Vault, which is our community content program. And you can make money on that. Like, that's yours. You get all the pay. I'm just there as a consultant to give you feedback and opinions and say, this is how we would do it if I was going to release this as an official release. So you got me. You basically get rent a developer for $350.
About a foot in the door. That is amazing.
It is also a nice foot in the door because we do often hire from. That's kind of. There's obviously a number of ways to get into the biz, but we definitely like to use community content as like a farm team, because you can look at something and say, oh, this person has created a quality thing without the support of the company behind them. So imagine what they can do with the tools that we're giving them, right?
Absolutely.
So the $350 pledge level is kind of like, let me give you that tool and give you an extra sort of leg up. Plus, like I said, you know, you can you sell it on there for money, so you can theoretically, you know, make back what you threw into the Kickstarter.
Yeah, we got a
no
lot
guarantees, but it's not impossible.
Maybe you don't have to worry about this, but there's a limited number of those 350 tiers. Are you?
Yeah, there is. There are 2 of them left. 2 out of 3 are left.
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, we got a lot of people in our Discord that are creative types that are really pushing stuff out and trying to go for the big leagues, and actually make something that gets published. So this might be your opportunity.
Yeah, I highly recommend it, and I love working with new people. And I think it would be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just listened to me talk about how twisted my head is. So if you want that over your shoulder while you're writing,
just to remind people, because it's been a while since we sent this is still based on 5e. So if you're familiar with 5e, like this is an opportunity to maybe get a chance to write for something that's still in 5e, where you're going to understand, a bulk of the systems and rules.
The core engine is no different. Everything is additions to that core engine, and in the way that you would expect. Like I said, there's nothing, there's no weird gotcha where you're like suddenly not going to understand how the system works.
Right. I mean, we've been talking about how weird the world is and how different the world is and how hard it is. Like we've been talking about how different it is for an hour and a half or more here, and I just thought it might be a good point when we're talking about getting involved in this potentially at a writer even level, like where it's like, hey, guess what though? Like you're it's still 5e. Like if you understand 5e, like you can do this. Like it's not that big of a bridge to have to cross.
Right, absolutely. And you'll have me there to shepherd you over too. So like anything that's confusing or challenging or whatever, I'm there to walk you through it. I mean, it really is like, I wish I had come across a Kickstarter that had this when I was, Kickstarter wasn't around when I was starting out, but I mean, if this was around when I was starting out, that's what I would have absolutely done. I would have scraped together some pennies and had a professional, consult on my work. And we've done things in the past where like someone would be a consulting developer on a future project that we're releasing, which is cool in a different way. But this is very much like you get to drive. You're in the driver's seat. You get to pick the idea, and as long as it falls within the scope of what's allowed on the Sluritian Vault, you're in charge. I'm just there to help. So it really is a cool opportunity to kind of show off what you're doing. And if anybody looks at my social media, I'll promote it because that's all I do on social media.
Sounds about right. Yeah,
I'm on the Twitter. If I see it, I know what he's talking about.
Yeah,
I mean,
I straight up tell people. Like I put a post up like 2 weeks ago. I was like on all my social media platforms. I was like, I'm about to do a Kickstarter. So you might want to mute me for the next 45 days. Because I know it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle against the algorithms. You know what I mean? So I'm willing to fight it.
Well, having the advantage of being able to work with somebody who has been through it, has learned the ins and outs, made the early mistakes and knows how to get past them in the future. That saves you so much time and struggle. That's something I don't think we see enough of just in society these days. Like that's tradition of mentorship or tradescraft or whatever. That needs to make a serious comeback because we got a lot of talented people that just need that opportunity and just a little help over that first hump. And so I'm really happy to hear that you're putting that out there. That's really awesome.
Thank you, and I hope if somebody's hearing this and they're thinking I'd like to do something, but I don't know where to start. This builds you a safety net. You know what I mean? Like you will have somebody to turn to and say, well, what do I do next? Which I cannot stress the value of. And again, I don't want to see somebody, it is pricey. It's $350. I don't want to see somebody, make a poor decision economically over it. But if you're in a position where you can make that work, even if it's just a little bit of a strain, I think it's worth a little bit of a strain. Don't go broke on it, but if that's really what you want to pursue, I really think it's a solid opportunity. I wouldn't have suggested
at that point it's an investment.
Right.
It's a little bit of a gamble perhaps, but it's also an investment at that point because you're I say it's at the end of the day, going to potentially have a product then that's going to return on that investment. So it's an investment at that point.
Right, and it also puts your foot in doors that it wouldn't already, because one thing that I think you'll find, especially in the 5th edition community content creators sort of ecosystem, is once you have a foot in the door, once you have something you can show to somebody else and say, oh, I worked on this, it starts becoming exponentially easier to get more work in that in that environment, if you're willing to like work with other people and stuff, because they know that you can be counted on. It's I remember funny, almost entirely unrelated anecdote. I was like 14, and there was a comic book store right by my apartment that I used to go to all the time, and I wanted to write comics. And I always talked about how I wanted to write comics. And one day, the comic book owner, who was a wonderful old gentleman who was very plugged into the industry, just knew a lot of people, knew a lot about it, finally sat me down and he said, you know why 95% of comic books never get made, kid? It's because they never get made. It's because nobody sits down and bangs out the script. Nobody does the work. You have a great idea, you talk about it, and then you sit on your thumbs. And that stuck with me. I wound up self-publishing a comic several years later and realizing that industry wasn't for me. But
but sometimes you have to take that dive in there to really know.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm glad I did it. And that ethic has seen me through very well in this industry. The work is about doing the work, you know, and once you get it going, it's very easy to keep it going.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that holds true just across the board. Like I can't think of a single, you know, project-oriented role that wouldn't benefit from that. It's really good.
No, that's fantastic. Like I am writing some story paths myself for a different system at the moment that I've been working on for over a year. But like, you know, it's right now my model is write it, run it, then run it again, and then maybe run it again, and then maybe find someone else to run it, just so I can just go through my own process and like figure out like what am I not seeing in my own work, and like so to have somebody there to like help look at it, you know, along the way would be an incredibly like valuable thing. I think at that point, like
it's a really handy boon, and it's also nice to. One thing I think I would have benefited from greatly when I first started is somebody over my shoulder to remind me that perfect is the enemy of done.
Yes.
You know, you can really. I've seen people who are. I know personally, off the top of my head, I could name 10 people that are more talented than I am, that aren't working in the field simply because they're not going to put something out that's imperfect. And they've been saying that for 15 years. And I know I know that their crap that they can't stand to show the world is 10 times better than anything I would come up with on my best day. You know, so maybe, you know, maybe you want to get into the business and you just need somebody to remind you, somebody over your shoulder to be like, no, that's really good, and you should just take the leap. I'm happy to do that too. You know, I'll do that for you for free and just tell you right now, it's that good. Take the leap. You know, if that's the only thing holding you back, get it out there.
Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah, so we've gone down this whole rabbit hole here a little bit, and it's really interesting. I'm big on this stuff because, like, you know, that's one of the main reasons why Dustin and I set out to do this sort of show, was just to kind of get ideas out there, to, you know, to share mistakes we've made in the past, to bring people together that, you know, haven't had the opportunity to speak with one another, and just to make sure people were learning, you know, the skills that go into having a successful tabletop experience, or writing, or doing art, or making music, or whatever. And so it's a really core tenet to what we're doing here. That said, is there any other thing that people should be looking at in particular for Scarred Lands?
So aside from again, Dead Man's Rest, please go back it on Kickstarter. We've got we just released Frostlands of Fenrilik, which is a community content expansion, which opens a whole new continent to the north. That's what we played through. If you check out the Tabletop Keyboard YouTube, I believe you guys have the actual play up now, or will
Yeah,
be
we
soon?
do. Yeah, it's up.
Yep, it's up.
Yeah. So definitely check that out. That's a fun little setting, kind of a snowpocalypse kind of setting.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just put out part 6 of Yugman's Guide to Gelspad, which is an expansion of classes, races, spells. It's basically like a player's guide too.
Nice.
By way of like a Tasha's or a Xanathar's. So you get some lore that's sprinkled in throughout it.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of it also like in-world artifacts. But it has new subclasses for every class, new spells, all sorts of fun stuff along those lines. And now that we've got the 6th installment out, we're in the process of putting together the collected edition, which will have some extra goodies in it. And in addition to those extra goodies, we'll be rolling out the alternate mechanic that we're introducing. We're calling it the People's Appendix. We're introducing an alternate mechanic to handle race and heritage a little differently.
Oh, interesting.
That I think people will really enjoy. To my mind, not to go too far into the weeds, but the short version of the philosophy behind it is that you have your physical aspects. I am an orc. I have a big body that will give me certain traits. And then you have your, cultural aspects.
Yeah.
So you could very well be a orc with a big body who has, a strength bonus maybe, but you were raised by dwarves. So you're also, pretty cool with, stonework and getting around in tunnels.
Yeah, nice.
You know what I mean? Like
that's a good approach.
And
I like that.
Yeah, so trying to give it something where it addresses some of the very valid concerns that people have in the community about racial determinism and things like that.
Yes,
and emphasizes the culture. One of the other things, again, we were spitballing about the gods. This doesn't do it yet in this, but one of the roadmap thing, and this is the last thing I'll sort of babble about. My roadmap is to really stress in future projects the relationship between alignment and religion. And pointing out the idea that in Scarred Lands, because the gods and the titans are such a part of that setting, your people who have a stronger connection to those institutions are going to be the ones who have the stronger manifestations of those alignments. And most of the people in Scarred Lands are what you would call polytheistic.
Yeah.
I need to be lucky today, so I'm going to pray to Ankili. I need to win this fight. I'll say a prayer to Vangal and hope that he gives a damn. Things like that.
I've always been mostly of the mindset that in a D&D fantasy world, there's really not a whole lot of place for real atheists. There's like in Scarred Lands, like the gods were here 100 years ago. We both people.
Right.
Grandpa talked to them and fought by their side. Like they're real people. Like you gotta they're real.
Right. Yeah, and this actually came up on Twitter. There are atheists in the sense of I do not follow any of those gods.
Right.
And I don't believe in their teachings. That absolutely happens because there are people who do not like the gods. Aside from druids who also generally don't like the gods. But in terms of like, I don't believe gods. I don't think it happened. It's harder to say when like you're stepping over like the corpse of one on your way to work in the morning.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, so everyone definitely check out Scarred Lands and check out those Kickstarters, check out those products. They really do sound really good. I like the sorts of philosophies that you're laying down, the creatures that you described earlier that have got me totally intrigued and terrified. I think it's good stuff.
They're all in Creature Collection, which is one of the add-ons you can add on the Dead Man's Rest Kickstarter, by the way.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely pick that up because I think those on their own are great.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone go check that out.
I do want to stress too, like it is because it's 5e. I mean, if you want to take this into your whatever 5e setting you're running in, you know, Forgotten Realms or whatever you wanted to do, and plug these creatures and these locations into that, there's nothing stopping you.
That's right.
They're compatible. I mean, everything's compatible. That's what I was getting at. Like it's still 5e. You can understand this game because it is still 5e at its core.
Definitely.
Right. You want to make a bunch of, spoiled Waterdavian, nobles PCs douse their drawers, drop a CR5 Scarlands creature in their lap.
Good stuff. So that gets us to our last few minutes of the show here. So we've been letting you know where you can find some of this content. Definitely go check that out. And then this is the part where we do our epically long plug for the end of our shows here. Hopefully we can get it done quickly. So if you look down below, you will see all of the stuff we do. So if you look at Monday nights, that's us here on the Wisdom Check, where Dustin and I are joined usually by a guest, and we talk about something related to the hobbycraft. So come check us out again next Monday at 10 p.m. Central Standard Time. Tuesdays, aka tomorrow, that is the day that Cam and Levi get real creative. So we have back-to-back shows now, and so we do, the first one is going to be Cam's show, Bardic Knowledge, where he gets on and makes music. He's been making a lot of music for our tabletop games that we stream on here, so we don't get, kicked off of Twitch. Everyone knows what's going on there, right?
That way you can hear us later when you come to watch the VOD.
That's right. So yeah, he makes some awesome stuff. He goes through the music theory and shows you all the steps along the way of his creative process. And then immediately following that, we switch gears and we go into art, where Levi does DM to art, and he's been working on my character portrait recently. So I'm a little biased, but it's good stuff. So go check it out there. He's thoroughly entertaining, and he's a really good artist. And he's also an art teacher, so he can give you a lot of the details, of technique and what the different elements actually are, which I appreciate. It's pretty cool. Which brings us to Wednesday night. This Wednesday night happens to be one of our bi-weekly games, and this one is an all flesh must be eaten game we call Don't Sleep, in which you all in the chat get to ruin our day, which seems to be how things go. You could spend 100 bits and bring in a zombie, and this seems to just get worse and worse by the week. I don't know. I haven't had a character live more than 2 sessions, maybe.
I ain't died yet. I don't know what you're complaining about.
No, you're going down this time, man. You got your face ripped off.
Well, this game, I don't know where Levi came up with the title Don't Sleep, but it was aptly named. Because
we
chat
never have.
Won't quit buying zombies to keep us out of combat long enough that every 4-hour game session is approximately 5 minutes of our character's day.
Yep.
So far, we've made it from one parking lot to another parking lot and then to the building next door. And that's all the further we have made it in 4 weeks of playing this game. So we're in session 5 and maybe 2 hours have passed total. We're never going to sleep because we will never get to nightfall. It's
a highly interactive game. You can also spend bits to buy us some randomized loot, which most of it is garbage. Most of it's nothing that we would ever want, but we find creative ways to use that stuff. Never let it be said that we aren't industrious and creative and
I took down a horde of zombies with some soft soap last week.
That's right. Soft soap was epic.
Soft soap got the shit. Got the shit done. Don't you worry.
That show is a lot of fun. That is just a big slapstick nonsense, us doing silly voices improv for the whole time. So come ruin our night, and we'll love it. And then
one of these weeks, chat's just got to show up, just be like, "Nah, we ain't doing it. We ain't buying nothing."
No, you guys actually have to play.
You guys have to role play now.
What?
And we're all gonna stand there like,
what do we do? Do we leave town?
What do we do? This is usually about the point that 25 zombies show up and try to rip our heads off. I don't know what to do with my life. Maybe we should get some dinner. Are you hungry?
So that brings us on to Thursday. Thursday is traditionally our video game night. And so we'll find something, either as a group we'll play together, or if no one's around, I will be playing some Dead by Daylight, and I will be playing Killer, so we'll get that fun. And I'm colorblind, so I can't see any of the visual cues that are in the game. So you get to watch me be a noob at ranked Killer matches, and it's pretty fun. So we got that. Friday is a day off. Saturday, is this Saturday? No, this Saturday is not Everstorm. We're not on for a while, are we?
I think we're still one more week out for Everstorm.
Okay.
I can check the schedule real fast to confirm that.
Yeah, while he's checking that, we play approximately every other week or every 3 weeks, somewhere in that window. So you have to be part of our Discord to know when we're going on that. But that is our 5th edition homebrew campaign that Levi runs, and it's our main
December
campaign.
5th. That's a Saturday.
Okay, there it is.
December 5th. We're back this Saturday.
Perfect. Okay, well, there's that to look forward to. So you guys can see us we just got done dealing with Titans and a whole lot of epic almost deaths. Sunday, what's going on Sunday, Dustin? Anything yet, or we're still on break?
No,
okay.
I just last Sunday we just had the Horn Huttenberg post game show, which is my second adventure path for Zweihander that I just finished my inaugural run on, which Jeff got to be a player in. We just had the entire cast back last Sunday. They said they talked about it. You can find that in the VODs, and I assume pretty soon that'll hit YouTube to go in that'll finish up the playlist for Horn Huttenberg. And then December 13th, my birthday of all days, we'll begin my next Zweihander campaign. I'm going to be doing a Bitter Harvest and something about Marie over the Christmas break before I get into my third written adventure for Zweihander that I'm working on right now, which is Vigilantes in Delandria. I got my cast announcements finally out for those, so my players are set for the Bitter Harvest and something about Marie, and then my other cast that I have set for Vigilantes of Delandria. I'm starting to work with them on stuff now and getting them prepped and ready for on-stream character creation. That'll happen sometime near the end of January.
Fantastic. So we got a lot of stuff to look forward to. So definitely join us on the Discord. Check out the YouTube. And Dustin, where are we headed off to next?
Oh, I don't know. I was totally just listening and having fun talking, and I did not do my job of finding us a raid.
So while he's looking for a raid there, thank you, chat, for joining us tonight. Appreciate you. We'll take you over to somewhere fun. And Travis, thank you once again for joining us tonight. It was a lovely conversation, and I'm every time I talk to you, I am more and more into Scarred Lands. Like I am slowly converting over. I'm ready. We're going to find a way to insert this somewhere in one of our established campaigns. It's going to be great.
I'm pleased to hear that. It makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Let's see. Who's playing some... Oh, you know what? Soul Bear RPG is playing Vampire the Masquerade. That's where we're going.
Nice.
We're going to go find them here. Let me get a creator dashboard here and pull up Soul Bear RPG.
Cool. We're going to load the bus. Make sure you sit tight. Tell them that we sent you on over there. And thank you all so much. Much appreciated. Always a treat.
All right. Awkward 10 seconds of waiting till I can hit the button.
Perfect.
That's how behind I am today.
Absolutely, Travis. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Say hi to Soul Bear RPG. We'll catch you over there. See you next week.